Hi there, Chris here. It's never too early to start sewing for the holidays, so for today's project for Christmas in July, I'm going to be making a monogrammed stocking using the Go Santa stocking die from AccuQuilt. So rather than monogramming on the cuff like you would traditionally see, I'm actually going to be having the monogram letter right in the middle of the stocking. So I'll be using a paper-pieced pattern called Black Letter. It's available from Patch and Dot. I'll link it in the description below. But you could really use any alphabet pattern you have. It could be foundation paper-pieced. It can be traditionally pieced. It can even be embroidered. You want your finished letter to be no bigger than about 7 inches tall and 6 inches wide. So if you have a pattern that makes a letter larger than that, you can also try scaling that down. So for today's project, we are going to need our die as well as a cutting board. My monogram letter will be this red fabric, and then the body of the stocking will be this fun gray metallic speckle that I thought looked like snow. And the front of the stocking and the cuff will be quilted, so we do have some scrap batting for that. Let's get started. All right, so to start on the paper piecing, what you will need is your paper piecing pattern. You'll need your fabric. I cut it into strips already just to make it a little easier. This is an add a quarter ruler. There's a little lip on it, which is really helpful when you fold over your paper to butt it up against it. But if you don't have an add a quarter ruler, any ruler that has a 1/4 inch mark will work just fine. And then a glue stick. You will also need an iron and an ironing surface. I like having one right next to my sewing machine. It just makes it easier because you're going to be doing a lot of little bits of pressing in between each piece. So on your pattern pieces, you will see that there are numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is the order that you need to sew the pieces on. So we are going to start with number 1. Now for this pattern, to tell which is the background and which is the actual letter pieces, there is this indicator right there. So this M tells me that this is the color for the letter M. I also just wrote in pencil on here just to make it a little more obvious as I am doing it. So we're going to start by putting a strip of fabric on piece 1 on the back side. And we're going to want to put it with the wrong side of the fabric to the paper. Now we also need to make sure that we're going to have full coverage on this. I don't think that piece is large enough. I can give this one a try. Paper piecing is not the most frugal quilting method, but what you can do is hold it up to the light and just make sure that you have full coverage, a 1/4 inch beyond each of the lines that make up your piece. So I think this piece will be sufficient right about there. So what I will do is then take my glue stick, just put some glue down. Not too much. You just want to hold it in place while you sew on your next piece. All right, we have our first piece glued down. So now what we need to do is fold the pattern piece on the line between pieces 1 and 2. So you can use any flat edge. Just hold it up against the line and fold. Now when you fold the paper, you will extend it out. Those bits don't matter as much. You just want to make sure it's folded where you need to trim. And now we'll take that add a quarter ruler, bump it up against the fold of the paper, and trim that off. Perfect. So piece 1 is covered. Now we need piece 2, and that is going to be the color of our letter. So I just have this strip, and I know piece 1 comes out here, so I'm just going to line up those for my 1/4 inch seam, and then take this over to the sewing machine. If you are having trouble, you can pin as well through all the layers just to keep everything in place. So we are just going to sew directly on top of that line all the way down. At the beginning and end of each line, where it meets another line, I'll backstitch just a couple stitches to secure it. You will want to shorten your stitch length. I like to do paper piecing at about a 1.7 or a 1.8 millimeters, so just shy of 2 millimeters. That will help you tear the paper out later, but you don't want it so small that the paper no longer stays in place while you're sewing. All right, let's go press this open. You'll want to press with a dry iron. Never use steam when you are paper piecing because it will distort the paper. All right, we have pieces 1 and 2. Now we need piece 3, which is this skinny little strip right there. So to add our next piece, first step is to fold the paper back along the sewing line. And then trimming away the excess fabric. Now I have a lot of excess fabric right here, so I know eventually I will be trimming on this line, so I will just preemptively fold it and trim some of that off so it's not in my way. Okay, so piece 3, we are back to background fabric. This piece looks large enough. So to make sure that a fabric is going to cover, what you can do on the back side is just kind of mark where those lines are, just for reference. So I know that I need to cover that plus 1/4 inch. And with your piece still folded back, you want to make sure that you have full coverage on the new piece you're sewing on. So this gray piece here, I know goes out to here, and I have coverage at both ends. So we're good to go. So I can hold that, take it over to the machine. Just making sure everything stayed aligned. And now I can sew along this line. All right, we'll go press that open. All right, that was 1, 2, 3. Now we need piece 4, which is up here, which is also the letter color. So we'll fold back along our stitching line. And if you don't fold exactly on the stitching line, it is not the end of the world. You want to be as close as possible. But once you have unfolded, you'll be stitching along the stitching line, so you will be fine. I'm just going to take a scrap of the red. That's the area I need to cover. This piece is plenty large, so I'll just line that up. I know that I'll be covered when it's all unfolded. Now I'll go sew it. All right, everything stayed aligned, so let's stitch along that line. Now, normally you would want to stop right where that meets another line, but this is the line where we're going to join our pieces together, our fully finished pieces, and this dotted line is our trim line. You could go to just there, but then this leaves this part open in your seam allowance, and I just don't prefer that. So on pieces like this, I will stitch out all the way to the edge. All right, we go press again. So that was piece 4. Next is actually piece 5, which is way down here. So we've already folded it because I did that to get rid of my excess, but we'll trim because this is a new piece. And now we need to make sure that all of this is covered when we place our new piece. So if I were to place this right here, you can see the fabric doesn't go out far enough. I could place it right here, but again, don't have full coverage. So what I'm going to do is place it right here. I do have a little bit of extra paper beyond my trim line. So if I'm a little itty bitty bit shy, it should be fine. But I'm going to line that up because this is the piece that I need to cover. And then I will trim off the fabric before I stitch it so that the seam allowances are lined up. Okay. Now we can go sew this one. If stuff moves while you're getting back to your sewing machine, just line it back up, unfold the paper, and stitch. And we just keep repeating these steps until we have done all numbers on our piece. That was 5. Next is number 6. I am going to go ahead and trim off some of this excess just so it's not in the way. Just kind of rough cut. All right, next is 6. Fold it back. Now we need fabric to cover this piece. One way to mark it on the backside is you can actually just fold along all the stitching lines. Some people sit and fold all of the stitching lines before they start sewing, and that can be helpful. Might not pick up on camera, but I can see the folds here, and that's the piece I need coverage for. So this will give me plenty of coverage. We'll get that stitched on. And you want to stitch just up to the line. If you go a stitch beyond, it's not a big deal, but if you go too far beyond, you'll have to rip the paper away to be able to fold the next piece. Once again, we're pressing. Trim off that excess. And our last piece for this pattern piece is 7. I've already creased that, so it's a real easy fold. And trim. And that's the piece I need coverage for. We fold it back. I can tell that this fabric will fully cover that because all of these edges are within the fabric. So we'll stitch this piece down. And our final press for this piece. And now we will trim all the way around on the dotted line. There we go. It is all trimmed. Now I just need to bake the other two. Oh. So if you mess up, like I sewed the wrong color on here, just cut your stitches and carefully pull it away. You will need to be careful because you've already perforated this paper, so it's going to be weaker. Now we're going to add the right color. All right, we've got all 3 pieces created. Now we can assemble them. So that is what it will look like. On the back side, you will see there's these triangles. This is a single triangle. Those 2 meet up. This is a double triangle, and those 2 meet up. So we will just place these right sides together, lining up this edge, and sew a 1/4 inch, which is this solid line right here. There's our first one. I'm going to wait to press this because I like to press my seams open and I want to get this little bit of paper out before I do that. All right. So to make sure we put this on the right side, we'll line up these double triangles and sew that. Again, lining up this edge. There we go. So now we'll start pulling out this paper and give it a final press. If you have tight corners where it doesn't want to come out, tweezers are really good for that. Just get it lifted and then you can tear it away. Our letter is complete, so now we can move on to the next step. All right, now that our letter is completed, we just need to add some fabric to the top and the sides as well as the bottom to make it large enough for the die. So on the die, I did map out kind of how big I need everything to be, but you could really just lay your letter down and then add strips of fabric until you have enough to cover it. Normally you would have your piece a 1/4 inch larger than all sides, but since we're going to be quilting this, I would recommend at least 1/2 inch larger, because while you're quilting it, it will shrink up the fabric just a little bit. So I have my letter, and this letter has some extra space at the bottom. If you need to, you can trim that off, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it. Add a skinny strip on this side, a larger strip on this side. This will be added to the top, and this will be added to the bottom. So I'm going to go sew these up and press it. Now you are going to want the top of the letter to be at least 3 inches down from the top here, because that is about where the cuff is going to be. So I've added a good chunk here so that after it's all quilted and assembled, you'll still be able to see the letter fully. So just make sure that this fully covers our stocking piece with plenty of overhang. We're good there. All right, so now I need to quilt this. So I've added it just to a single piece of batting. It does not matter what kind of batting. This is a small enough piece. You may not need to baste it. This is sticking pretty well, so I'm not going to. And I'm going to use my favorite painter's tape hack for quilting. So I'm going to stitch with the walking foot along this edge, and then I'll just reposition the tape and then make it go the other direction, and then I'll end up with a nice crosshatch. So let's head over to the machine and do that now. All right, so I have my walking foot installed, and I'm going to sew along this tape edge, just following it with the edge of the foot. And then I will just reposition the tape right along that line, and then repeat the stitching. There we have our quilted front ready to go. Now I also want to quilt the cuffs. Those are going to be solid red. And I'm going to quilt them the same, but at a smaller scale. So I'm going to go do that now and I'll be right back. All right, I got my 2 panels for the cuff front and cuff back cut. I will also need 2 panels of the same fabric but not quilted, and then a small strip for the hanging strip. I'll also need fabric for the back of the stocking, and I will be lining my stocking, so I have some scrap fabric for that as well. So now we're ready to start cutting. So I'm going to cut the front of the stocking out first, but I want to make sure that the letter ends up where I want it to be. So I'm going to trim the top here so that it is looks like 3 3/4 from this seam. And I've drawn a line that is a 1/4 inch from the top of the shape. And I will use that line to line up my fabric. And to make sure that it's centered, you can press down and feel exactly where the blade is. Just press down a little bit and you'll feel a little pressure. And that way you can make sure that you are far enough from the edge. Now remember, there's going to be a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you want to make sure to account for that. Keep that lined up. So it feels like it's right there, and right there, so I can still move over a little bit more. So that is exactly where I want it. Now, to make sure that it doesn't move as I'm running it through the machine, I'll pull out my trusty painter's tape again and just put some to tape it in place. Just a few small pieces. And that way it won't shift on me. So we'll go ahead and add our cutting mat. Make sure that it covers the blades and run it through. Peel that tape off. There we go. So now I'll cut 3 more of this shape and then my cuffs. So that will be my lining. And this is the back piece, except I cut it backwards. Okay, those two are correct. But this should have been the other way. Alright, so we're just going to have a little bit of a different color for the back. Not a big deal, except I need to flip it over. Alright, so that is something to note. Make sure that you mirror image your cuts for your front and your back. So I have the stocking body cut out, and now I need to do the cuffs. Since they are quilted, I'm just going to cut one at a time, but I think I'll load up. This should be fine. That's less than 6 layers. Make sure the die shape is fully covered. Alright, we've got all of our pieces cut. We have our front and back mirror image stocking. We have our lining, also mirror image. We have 2 quilted cuffs, 2 plain cuffs, and the stocking hanger. I just cut this 2 inches by about 7 inches. That will all depend though on how much of a loop you need. If you have a stocking hanger or something like that, you can make it longer or shorter as needed. And now we could start assembling. So for the front and back, we are going to sew these right sides together at just a 1/4 inch all the way around. We will do the same for the lining, but we are going to leave a small opening. And this is so we can turn it right side out later. So we need a couple inches sewn up here, and then probably like 3 to 4 inch opening. And I would recommend right here, because that is a straight seam. Everywhere else you have curves you're dealing with. So those will get sewn right sides together. And then for the cuffs, sew right sides together, one of the quilted and one of the non-quilted along one of the long ends. Since I am dealing with quilted material, I did leave my walking foot on. We're going to sew this at a 1/4 inch. So we've got those all stitched. We're going to set the stocking bodies aside for now. We need to finish making our cuff. So we need to press this seam so that it is going towards the quilted side. So we'll start with that side on top and fold it back. Now it's going to be a little thick because it is quilted. Just kind of work it down and then press it. All right, there's one side. And the second side. So now we're going to take both of these, place them right sides together so that both of the quilted sides are touching and both of the plain sides are touching. And then we're going to sew 1/4 inch down each side. All right, we've got that sewn. So now we are going to turn this right side out. And if you like, you can do a little top stitch around this edge to keep everything in place. It is a little thick at the seams, so just something to be aware of. But on the stocking, this will be the bottom edge. So on the body, it'll end up like that. So you will see this edge if you want to do a little top stitch. I'm just going to press mine in place. Now for the hanging strip, what we'll do is fold this in half and press a crease. And then open it up and press both sides in to the middle. Very similar to making double fold bias tape. Here's one side. And then lastly, I like to fold it in half again and just give it a really good press. And if you're having trouble with it not staying flat after you press, you can try using a tailor's clapper. Just hold that there for a couple seconds. And that should help. All right. Now we are going to sew down both sides, just really close to the edge. And that will make our hanging loop. And here it is all sewn up. All right, we have our main body sewn together. We have our lining sewn together. We have our hanging loop, and we have our cuff. So it's time to assemble everything. So to start, we'll take the outside of the stocking and flip it right side out. If you want, you can press this. So next goes our cuff. And just line up the seams. I'll be using some sewing clips to keep everything together and on track. So I'm going to make the seam of the cuff go one way and the seam of the stocking go the other, so they're nesting. Start by pinning at the seams to make sure they're lined up. And then if you need, you can put some additional clips around the edges just to make sure everything stays where it needs to be. Okay, so that's our cuff. Next, we need to add in the hanging loop. So what I like to do is with the one side facing up, bring the two edges together. That way you get a fun little loop rather than one just like this. Having it looped this way will help your stocking hang facing forward rather than it wanting to move to the side. So this goes on the heel side seam and just clip it right on top. And now with the lining, leaving this wrong side out, you're going to shove everything in there. And then again, line up the side seams and clip everything in place. There's a lot of layers going on, so just take your time and make sure not to lose the hanging loop on this side. And then we'll go over to the sewing machine and sew all the way around. Now, my sewing machine doesn't have a free arm, but if yours does, you can take off your sewing bed and put this around your free arm. Otherwise, you'll have to work from the top side like I am. So just take your time, get everything into position. Here, I'm starting on the heel side. This is where the hanging loop is, because I want to get that tacked down right away so I don't accidentally lose it. I did backstitch over it just for a little extra reinforcement. And now I'll stitch 1/4 inch all the way around. All right, that's all sewn. And now we'll use that opening that we left in the lining to pull everything right side out. So now you have something that should look like this. We're almost done, but we do need to close up this hole right here. So if you remember, I said the best place to do it is at this point because that's a straight seam. So what you can easily do is press this right where it wants to fold. It should be 1/4 inch from the edge. So just give that a little press. And then I'll take this back to the machine and just sew a straight stitch about a 1/16 from the edge just to seal up that hole. This is on the inside of the stocking, so it's never really going to be seen. Now that that's sealed up, we'll take the lining and push it inside the stocking. Make sure to get the toe and the heel all the way down. Then you can style it like you like. You can fold over the cuff. I like to fold it almost all of the way to that seam, leaving maybe like 3/4 inch on the inside. So the hanging loop just sticks out right there. You can see there's still some on the inside. If you want, you can fold it all the way down, but I think this just gives a cleaner look. And there you have it, all complete. So this is great. You can customize it for every member of your family with their letter and their color preferences. This makes a great keepsake. It's a stocking you're going to have for many years to come. Thanks for watching.